There is a very sophisticated way to avoid calling a war a war. You declare it overnight when the 60-day clock runs out, then you move back into the same theater, against the same opponent, in the same strategic choke point, with warships, aircraft, drones, intelligence assets, armed escorts and rules of engagement already in place. Only this time, you do not call it war. You call it a humanitarian mission. You call it freedom of navigation. You call it protection for neutral shipping. You call it Project Freedom. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than Iran, much bigger than Trump, and much bigger than one naval operation in the Strait of Hormuz. Because the real question is not whether the United States is present in the Gulf. The United States has been present there for decades. The real question is whether a president can declare hostilities finished on paper, avoid a direct confrontation with Congress, and then restart the same conflict under a cleaner, safer, more politically defensible label. Trump formally told Congress that hostilities with Iran had ended just as the 60-day limit under the War Powers Resolution was becoming impossible to ignore. That law exists for one reason: to prevent a president from dragging the United States into an open-ended war without congressional authorization. So, on paper, the message was simple: the war is over. But out at sea, in the Strait of Hormuz, surrounded by tankers, drones, missiles, naval patrols, and global energy routes, the message looked very different. The operation did not disappear. It changed language. Project Freedom is being presented as a mission to escort commercial vessels from countries not directly involved in the conflict. Neutral ships, civilian crews, essential cargo, humanitarian protection. And that framing is extremely powerful because it allows Washington to say, "We are not attacking Iran, we are helping the world. We are not reopening a war, we are protecting innocent ships. We are not escalating, we are defending global commerce." That is the intelligent part of the strategy. It is also the dangerous part, because when a war becomes politically toxic, you can repackage it as humanitarian logistics. When Congress can block a war, you make it much harder for Congress to block a mission that appears to protect civilians, shipping lanes, and the global economy. If Iran reacts, it can be framed as the aggressor attacking neutral vessels. If Iran does not react, it loses symbolic and operational control over one of the most important choke points on Earth. And this is the point many people are missing. Hormuz is not just a narrow strip of water on a map. It is one of the pressure points of the global economy. A huge share of seaborne oil moves through that area. Energy flows from the Gulf reach Asia, Europe, and global markets. And above all, one thing moves through Hormuz even faster than oil: risk perception. When Hormuz becomes unstable, it is not only the price of crude that reacts. Insurance premiums move. Shipping costs move. Routes are reconsidered. Companies delay decisions. Governments review strategic reserves. Traders price in disruption. And eventually, that pressure can reach transportation, manufacturing, fuel costs, delivery times, and consumer prices. Hit like here, because this is exactly the kind of mechanism we need to understand before it shows up at the gas pump, in freight rates, in inflation data, and in the decisions companies make behind closed doors. Modern war does not need to shut down everything to create massive damage. It only needs to raise uncertainty. It only needs to make a shipowner wonder whether a route is still insurable. It only needs to make a carrier delay one passage, a port slow one operation, an insurer raise one premium, or a government quietly prepare for the next shock. So Project Freedom is not just a naval mission. It is a message. To U.S. allies, it says America is still willing to act as the security guarantor of critical energy routes. To Iran, it says Hormuz cannot be used freely as a pressure weapon. To Congress, it says this is not a war that needs authorization, it is a protective mission. And to the markets, it says Washington does not intend to let Tehran control the psychological balance of the strait. But every deterrence message carries an escalation risk. When you place military assets in a narrow maritime corridor, close to Iranian forces, with drones, missiles, fast boats, radar systems, electronic warfare, and tense communications all operating at once, an incident is no longer a remote possibility. It becomes part of the environment. One boat gets too close. One drone is misread. One radar signal is interpreted the wrong way. One missile is intercepted. One commercial vessel enters the wrong area at the wrong moment. And suddenly a humanitarian escort mission can become a direct military clash. That is why this is not only a military issue. It is a constitutional issue. The War Powers Resolution was designed to force a basic democratic question. If American forces are being placed in hostilities, does the president have the backing of Congress? The 60-day limit is not a technicality. It is a limit on executive war-making power. So when a war is declared over at the edge of that deadline, and the same theater is reopened under another name, the question becomes much larger than Iran. It becomes a question about how easily democratic oversight can be bypassed by changing the vocabulary of war. Follow the channel for more analysis like this, because the headline is rarely the real story. The real story is the mechanism underneath the headline. And here, the mechanism is very clear. Change the legal label, change the political terrain, and force your opponents to argue against a mission that sounds humanitarian, even if it operates in a battlefield environment. The real question is not whether Project Freedom is humanitarian or military. The real question is whether it can be both at the same time. And the answer is yes. It can involve real civilian ships, real crews, real cargo, and real concerns about safe navigation. But it can also be the perfect instrument for returning to the same conflict without calling it a conflict. That ambiguity is what makes it effective. And that ambiguity is what makes it dangerous. Because it protects the people who use it politically, while increasing the risk for the people operating inside it. Saying, "We are attacking Iran," triggers one kind of political reaction. Saying, "We are escorting neutral ships," triggers another. But if, during that escort, you shoot down drones, intercept missiles, destroy boats, and apply military pressure inside the strait, the difference becomes more narrative than operational. This is where geopolitics meets supply chain risk. Supply chains do not only break when something explodes. They break when the calculation of risk changes. When a company waits instead of moving cargo. When an insurer raises the price of coverage. When a port slows down. When a route becomes politically sensitive. When a trader anticipates a disruption. When an industrial buyer realizes transportation costs may no longer be stable. Modern war does not only hit with missiles and drones. It hits with time, cost, uncertainty, and fear. That is exactly why I wrote my book, available on Amazon, to connect geopolitics, supply chains, and operational risk in a way that helps you read these events not as isolated news stories, but as signals inside a much larger system. Because energy, ports, shipping routes, insurance, military power, and political decisions are now moving together. So let's return to the original question. Did Trump declare the war over in order to restart the clock? We cannot state that as an absolute certainty. But politically, the sequence is hard to ignore. First, the war is closed on paper. Then the same theater is reopened under a different label. First, the issue is Iran. Then it becomes freedom of navigation. First, it is a military problem. Then it becomes a humanitarian one. First, Congress can debate a war. Then Congress is asked to challenge a mission protecting civilian ships. That is a refined move. Technically smart. Politically aggressive. But it places the world on a very thin line, because when a war is disguised as a logistics mission, the risk does not disappear. It only changes language. And very often, when the language becomes cleaner, the reality becomes more dangerous. Leave a like if this helped you see the story behind the story. Follow the channel for more analysis on geopolitics and supply chains, and look for my book on Amazon if you want to understand how energy, shipping routes, choke points, and hybrid wars are reshaping global power. Because today, the front line is not only on land. It is at sea, inside insurance contracts, inside freight costs, inside fuel prices, inside delivery times, and inside every war that stops calling itself a war exactly when it becomes most important to understand.